It's time now for Perspective. My guest today is a woman named Yasmeen Mjalli, a Palestinian-American woman who's been heralded as a driving force of the Middle East's Me Too movement. Back in 2016, in protest against gender-based street harassment in Ramallah, she began a successful clothing line with items emblazoned with the slogan, "Not your habibti," or "Not your darling." And more recently, she's turned her attentions to the still taboo subject of menstruation. Yasmeen Mjalli joins me now in the studio. Thank you so much for coming in to speak to us here on France 24. Now, you live in Ramallah, so tell us, what are you doing here in Paris?
I'll be speaking today at the Arab World Institute amongst a panel of 8 women from all over the Arab world who are doing similar work in the movement for women's empowerment.
Now, about 3 years ago, you started a project that really resonated with women across the Arab world and beyond. You decided to start using your clothes to make a statement against street harassment. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so I started with the phrase "not your habibti," which was designed to draw attention to the discrimination that women can face simply because they are women, whether within Palestine or within the larger world, because it is a very patriarchal issue. So my work sort of attempts to do 2 different things, which is to empower women within Palestine, but also to challenge stereotypes within the West that women are victims, and somehow as if this is only inherent to the Arab world.
And were you surprised by just how well those items were received?
I really was surprised. I wasn't sure what was going to happen within the Arab world or without the Arab world, but women, men, everyone in between, everyone without that spectrum has received it so warmly.
Now, your organisation, Baby Fist, soon turned into a much wider feminist movement. I'd like to talk about your latest major project, and that's a menstrual education campaign for girls and young women. On your website, you say that about 70% of young Palestinian women learn about periods from their mums, but that's not necessarily a good thing, in your opinion.
I think that our mothers are a wealth of information, but the issue is that oftentimes, because this information is passed down with the stigma, with the taboo that it contains over many generations, oftentimes this can result in misinformation that is passed down. Even me, who attended an American university and American schools in the US, I received misinformation within my school itself, as well as taboo and stigma. So the issue lies within the family, but also sort of within our larger social institutions.
Now, you talked just then about the stigma that surrounds menstruation. This stigma, of course, can lead to low self-esteem among young women and girls, but also can have an impact on young women's education.
Yeah, absolutely. Oftentimes, girls will have to drop out of school because they don't have access to sanitary supplies, or they need to go home for severe pain that they're not able to deal with properly, medically speaking. There's a number of reasons that women won't advance onto university, for example. So not only is it a matter of self-perception and presentation in the world, but it's also a matter of being able to advance yourself within society so that you have an equal place in the public space.
And would you go so far as to say that menstruation is a human rights issue?
I believe it's a complicated question. It is and it isn't. It's a universal in that many women, most women, and women-identified persons deal with menstruation. But it's also very nuanced in that the way it is perceived and dealt with is very unique to a particular culture and time and place, not one better than the other, just all very unique from one another and requiring different approaches to a conversation about menstruation.
Now, you're trying to take this conversation to public schools across the West Bank. That's one of your major aims of this campaign. What form does this education take?
So we divide our workshops into two halves. The first is a biological aspect, which just attempts to educate the girls about what's happening to their bodies internally and physiologically, so that they have that skill set to understand how to take care of themselves. The second half is dedicated to artistic activities, which engage the girls in a conversation about who they are as humans, within the home, within society at large. And we aim to encourage the girls to understand that their menstruation and their bodies aren't by any means a reason to exist in spite of themselves or despite themselves, but rather that these are beautiful things to be embracing, and that they don't by any means mean that you cannot have an equal place in society or equal opportunity.
And how have the girls you've been teaching been reacting to your project?
I wasn't sure how they would react initially, but we've done a series of workshops, and every time the girls have been so warm in their reception and so passionate and curious. We actually went in with a more limited biological aspect, trying to limit it purely to menstruation, but eventually we developed it according to the questions the girls were answering, because they wanted to know more. They were given a space, a very safe space, in which they could finally ask the things that they were always a bit curious but afraid to ask. And so we restructured it to be far more intensive and extensive regarding the body and reproduction than it was before. They've been very curious and very passionate.
So an extremely warm reception from the women and the young girls you're teaching. What about the authorities? Because you are, of course, trying to roll this out in public schools.
Right. Actually, it's quite surprising that the authorities aren't the ones that are presenting an obstacle. On the contrary, the Ministry of Education in Palestine has been very willing to work with us, giving us permissions and permits to go into schools. It's actually the societies with the villages themselves that are having a bit of a tough time convincing parents to let us in, to engage with their daughters regarding these very taboo issues. So the obstacle lies within society itself, not the authorities.
And why exactly do you think it is that there is still so much stigma in so many parts of Middle Eastern society towards issues like menstruation?
Well, to be clear, this isn't a Middle Eastern issue or a Muslim issue or an Arab issue. This is actually an issue all over the world, whether you're within France, within the United States, or within the Middle East. So women everywhere have to hide their sanitary supplies in their bags. They have to whisper that I'm on my period. We use euphemisms like it's that time of month, as opposed to just being kind of upfront and forthright about it. This is a very universal issue, and it's stigmatized because women are seen as inherently more dirty, as inferior because of this thing that we do so naturally. And I think to battle it, we have to do it kind of internationally, and to first of all approach it as something that is inherently human, as opposed to unique to a particular culture.
Yasmeen Mjalli, feminist activist, educator and entrepreneur, thank you so much for speaking to us here on France 24. I don't think we could have had a better guest for this International Women's Day.
Thank you so much.